Welcome back to the show, and today, my friends, we're going to be breaking down all of the new gameplay from Bethesda's upcoming title, Starfield, which was premiered during the Xbox Bethesda Showcase last week. We'll talk gameplay mechanics, exploration, ship design, and a whole lot more. But before we get into that, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and hit that notifications bell, as I'll be making a whole lot more Starfield content as we move ever closer to launch. And let's face it, you don't want to miss that. Now getting back to it, let's break down what we know about Starfield's story so far before getting into the nitty-gritty of the gameplay mechanics. Starfield is set in the 2030s in a small pocket of the Milky Way around 50 light years from our solar system in a region known as the Settled Systems, which are in the process of recovering from a bloody colony war between the two largest factions in the game, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective. Now, whilst these factions have come to a fragile peace, it doesn't mean that this pocket of the Milky Way is safe, as alongside political intrigue, you'll have to contend with, or side with, the bands of mercenaries and pirates known as the Crimson Fleet and religious fanatics from House Varun. Against this backdrop, you take control of a player-created character who, after some early game shenanigans, is invited to join up with Constellation. This group is essentially the last organization of humans with their hearts set on exploring space, with the overarching goal of discovering the truth behind a series of alien artifacts which are known to be building, well, something. These artifacts have the ability to communicate visions with anyone who comes into contact with them, just like the Promethean beacon did to Commander Shepard in Mass Effect 1. And incidentally, this one kinda looks like a Dyson sphere, which is essentially a theorized form of megastructure that could be built around a dying star to harvest enormous amounts of energy over a massive swathe of time. Regardless, it seems to me that the main narrative will have you hunting down these relics, and there isn't really much more that we know at this point. So now that the stage is set, let's move on and talk about what the new gameplay footage revealed about exploration in Starfield. And I'll start off by highlighting the fact that the universe in which this game is set is freaking huge. At the start of the gameplay reveal, Todd the Golden God came on stage and told us that Starfield was going to be an epic game that would let you be who you want and go where you want. And he wasn't kidding. According to the Toddster, players will be able to visit more than 100 star systems and land on over 1,000 planets and moons. And you won't be locked into exploring population centers, you'll be able to set down literally anywhere you want on any given planetary body. That is a ridiculously large map, and the sheer vastness of the universe has actually left a lot of people worried that the worlds within it would seem largely void of content in the context of it. After all, with this many worlds in play, there's literally no way that the terrain, atmospheres, flora and fauna could be handcrafted. That means that Starfield's planets beyond certain regions that are central to the main story must be created via procedural generation, or to put it softly, content that is created using an algorithm. One of the main concerns that people have about these procedurally generated maps is that they can rarely compete in terms of quality with a level that's been handcrafted by a developer, and that after a while these algorithm-based worlds have a tendency to look a little bit, well, samey. And then it's difficult not to circle back to the fact that when you have this many systems to explore, you do run the risk of making the game feel sparse. This was one of the major problems with the title Elite Dangerous, and to an extent No Man's Sky close to launch. Two games which I'm sure I'll be mentioning throughout the video. After a while, Elite Dangerous in particular seemed to lack any kind of direction, and you were essentially forced to find the fun yourself in a very seemingly empty universe. However, Starfield is not either of those games. The fact that it has a massive map is not the main selling point, it's just a delicious garnish. Unlike Elite Dangerous, it has NPCs, a central quest, and what I'm sure will be a ridiculous number of side quests to undertake that'll show off some of the procedurally generated worlds without trying to make them the star of the show. And I'm really hoping that in the end game we're going to get some kind of Skyrim-esque Radiant quest system, which will generate an endless stream of side quests that'll encourage you to go to areas of the galaxy that you've hitherto never seen. Speaking of the map, the in-game star chart, which will be used by the player to navigate the galaxy, looks freaking beautiful. At a glance at it, you can see the major population centers of a planet along with its mineral and atmospheric makeup, along with a range of other factors. And you can improve this data by scanning them and, of course, by visiting the surface. Zooming out gives you a look at the vastness of Starfield's, well, Starfield, and allows you to set courses and initiate a grav jump to an entirely new solar system. But that's enough about the vastness of the setting. Let's focus in on some of the examples of planetary exploration that we saw in Sunday's showcase. First up, we got a look at the desolate moon Crete, which orbits the larger planet of Ansalon. During the mission, the player is tasked with finding their way to a research station and finding out that it's been taken over by pirates, perpetrating bloody murder upon them. We also got a look at the capital city of Constellation, New Atlantis on the planet Jemison, and this kind of gives off a militant Starfleet vibe, or maybe something like the Citadel from Mass Effect. Beyond this, we also got a whole mess of quick-cut glimpses at a ton of other worlds ranging from backwater outposts to metropoli and tropical resorts. But for now, let's focus in on Creep, because it was here that we got a good look at the HUD and how it shifts depending on what you're doing while exploring. Ordinarily, the display shows the player's health bar, oxygen meter or compass, the weapon that you currently have equipped, your ammo, and your grenade count. However, upon moving onto the planet's surface here, we can see that the player enters a scanner mode and focuses in on some local fauna. Here, along with telling us what it is, we're also told that there are other things to scan in this biome, which suggests that you're going to be able to sell map data to a vendor in a population hub later on. Regardless, in this mode you're able to use a laser cutter to harvest materials with which to synthesize new equipment. The HUD also subtly shifts in what it tells you, with the readout on the left detailing the current temperature, O2 saturation of the atmosphere, and the strength of the planetary body's gravity relative to Earth. And these won't simply be pointless recordings designed to promote immersion. We can see a little later on that the player is able to jump large distances owing to the reduced gravity of this planetary body, and I'm guessing that specialized equipment will be needed to survive on worlds that boast extreme temperatures. But moving on, during this clip we also got to see some bug-like local wildlife, which definitely has a procedurally generated No Man's Sky feel to it. Incidentally, I like the way that this freak show clearly reacted to the player's presence, but after a tense standoffish moment, both the beastie and the protagonist decided that this wasn't the time to end each other's existences. It felt weirdly natural, and it got me wondering as to the sophistication of Bethesda's procedurally generated ecosystems and how they related to creature behavior. Of course, this being a Bethesda game, it was inevitable that Todd & Co would be unable to resist the urge to include a lock-picking minigame. And we were #blessed enough to get a look at that mechanic in a brief lull as the player butchered their way through a pirate-infested research lab. With a novice level lock, this basically involves matching up lines in the circle's periphery with gaps in the inner circle, though I'm guessing this process will get a little bit more convoluted as the difficulty of the challenge increases. Oh, and there is seemingly a way to screw this up, as you appear to have a limited number of lockpicks. Sorry, I mean digipicks. Incidentally, players will also be able to build planetary bases where you can rest and gather the resources needed to continue your journey. Once you've laid down an outpost beacon, which defines where you can build, construction seems to be pretty modular and is done from an overhead perspective rather than the first-person mode, as is the case with games like Subnautica and No Man's Sky. Modules will cost resources and some will need power to operate, with specialized buildings providing electricity, storage space and more. Now this is obviously a huge plus for me, as I love base builders, and as a bonus you'll get to staff it with NPCs that you meet along the way to help it run, and probably to use some of the more advanced functions in the base. But planetary bases are one thing, being able to design and fly your own ship is another. Now, I had naturally assumed that the Ridley Scott-esque spacecraft seen in the footage to date would be the default ship for the player, and that they'd then be able to maybe upgrade it and get a couple of variations further down the road. It turns out that I was completely wrong, and that sci-fi nerds are going to be completely spoiled. Starfield is going to let you piece together and heavily customize the look of your own starship with which to explore the frontiers of settled space. You're going to be able to build your ship from a set of pre-designed modules including cockpits, structural elements, engines and fuel tanks, and of course, weapon systems, just to name a few. Each of these modules will provide their own benefits to the ship, and it's going to be awesome to see what the community comes up with and whether the toolset is going to be flexible enough to let them get truly creative. I mean, I'd love to see famous ships from the sci-fi pantheon such as the Normandy from Mass Effect and Serenity from Firefly living in that universe. And of course, it isn't simply a playground. There will be limitations as to how you build your ship. Reactor power, overall mass, and fuel reserves, for example, will be key factors in determining the jump range of your ship and its handling. But it's not going to be as involved as, say, Kerbal Space Program, in that you're not going to have to worry about aerodynamics and your center of mass and lift. However, you are going to want to tread that line when it comes to maneuverability, as your ship will inevitably be thrown into combat at certain points, and it's going to see your piloting skills along with your ship's survivability and weaponry tested to their limits. But getting back to flight and looking at the cockpit, it looks like you're going to be able to shift power reserves between key systems in order to boost your ship's maneuverability and speed, along with its offensive and defensive systems. Beyond that, you'll also have access to the standard fare of hull and shield strength readouts and of course a radar, but it's going to be interesting to see how far they go with the flight sim element, because right now it's looking fairly close to elite dangerous levels. Of course, there'll also be plenty of gunplay outside of the cockpit as well, and judging by what we've seen, Bethesda has opted to use all of the conventional mechanics here. You know, they're not trying to reinvent the murder wheel. It essentially looks like what Cyberpunk 2077 was hoping to achieve with their combat, albeit with a little more weight to it. To date, we've seen weapons ranging from pistols to shotguns to rifles to laser cutters, with players able to shoulder their weapons to run and gun or aim down the sights for more precise wet work, while changing weapons is done via the classic wheel menu system. I was also happy to see during Sunday's gameplay that enemies didn't look to be too bullet spongy when they're at your level. However, I imagine that's going to change if they get significantly above it, so it'll be interesting to see how enemy scaling works. It's also worth pointing out that enemies seem to have weak points that you can aim for to end the fight quicker, such as this unfortunate's jetpack. However, there won't always be a jetpack to aim for, as humans won't be the only enemy you're going to face in this game. You'll also have to contend with many other forms of life that populate this region of the Milky Way, many of which have sharp teeth, a bad attitude, and a hunger for human flesh. And of course, given that Starfield is essentially Skyrim in space, Todd and the good folks at Bethesda are sure to have gone all out with the role-playing elements of the game. And that becomes immediately apparent when you look at the character creator showcased in the new footage. According to the recently purchased Todd, this one will be the most flexible to date and will allow you to heavily tailor your appearance and select a background for your character, while also applying key traits that'll help define your playstyle. Furthermore, you'll be able to change certain aspects of your character later in the game by visiting a genetics facility, so don't freak out too much if you feel like you screwed it up at launch. Of course, Bethesda being Bethesda, there will also be an extensive skill tree where you can spend XP to increase your attributes and effectiveness in combat. These skills can also be ranked up to increase their potency, and while this is unquestionably a deep RPG and so requires a large amount of character development, I do find myself slightly concerned about the sheer number of options available. I don't want to spend too much game time that could be spent engaging in digital sin trying to figure out where I'm going to put my freaking ability points. On a similar note, it also looks like there's going to be a crafting system where you can spend the resources acquired from vendors and through mining. And again, I'm really hoping that there isn't going to be an endless sea of modifications and weapons to be made here, and that they've made this process as streamlined as possible, or it's going to start to feel more like a chore than a joy. But moving on, as in Skyrim but not in Fallout, the protagonist in Starfield will not be voiced, which personally I'm a big fan of. Having a set voice paired with a character that you've lovingly created from scratch has always felt a little jarring to me. And as a side note, all conversations, bar cutscenes I imagine, will take place from a first-person perspective. As to the conversations you'll have, the decisions you'll make, and the bearing that they'll have on the overall trajectory of your experience, well, it's a Bethesda game, so you know that they'll be meaningful as to how the game unfolds. For example, we know for a fact that you're going to have the opportunity at points to side with the ruthless pirates of the Crimson Fleet, and you just know that this creepy collector-looking a-hole is going to present you with some morally ambiguous decisions. Plus, given the setting of the game, it wouldn't surprise me if you had the opportunity to defuse or foment another war between the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies. To wrap it up, graphically speaking, I think the game looks fantastic, and at least from what I've seen so far, it's nailing the gritty, practical sci-fi aesthetic that I was hoping to see from Bethesda's next game. The planetary surfaces look like they're going to show a good amount of variety, running from bleak, inhospitable moonscapes to verdant alien moons and a ridiculous amount more. The interior spaces also look superbly well lit, and their design seems to faithfully echo their function. Incidentally, as many of you know, I'm a giant space nerd, and we can see in the trailer that you're going to be able to check out an aerospace museum with Apollo-era tech, and that you can find a derelict rover on a Mars-like planet. So obviously, this game is going to get a 10-bearded console gamers out of 10 for me. And on that note, I'm going to leave it there for today. Be sure to let me know what you think of the Starfield gameplay deep dive in the comments section below. And in the meantime, be sure to keep it here for all the biggest news, reviews, and reactions from across the video gaming industry.